We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And to briefly explain the new setup that we've got going on here, we typically record this on the Senate side of Capitol Hill, where there's a number of places over there in the Russell Rotunda to set up a camera for an occasion such as this. But as you may have noticed, there's a lot of things going on the Senate side of Capitol Hill right now. Those spaces are not necessarily available for folks like us, and so here we are on the House side of Capitol Hill, outside, just standing outside. It's a beautiful day. Let's talk farm policy.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
While the Senate Judiciary Committee continues.
As we stand here, they are still within conversations. A lot of things going on the Senate side of Capitol Hill, but there was also some developments in farm policy this week. First development, and arguably the most important of the week, being that there will not be developments this week on the Farm Bill. The September 30th deadline will come and go, the negotiators confirmed. And Phil, this is something that a lot of people who had been reading the writing on the walls had kind of assumed was going to happen for a couple of weeks now. But now we have it officially from the negotiators that this September 30th deadline is going to come and go.
It is. It's there will be the 2014 Farm Bill will expire on Sunday. That's going to leave a lot of programs without funding or authority. Just want to stress, though, that crop insurance, federal crop insurance program is permanently authorized. Nothing happens to it. Congress doesn't even have to do anything. The major commodity programs continue on. They're still good for the marketing year for each crop. That varies depending on the commodity. And the main nutrition program, food stamps, SNAP, that continues on as well.
So a number of things that don't necessarily expire just because the legislation does. But Phil, in terms of a timeline going forward, we know that September 30th is going to come and go. We also know that there's midterm elections that are coming up here early in November. But we're also well aware of the fact that the House is not going to be in session during the month of October. And so what does that do in terms of Farm Bill dialogue and when we should expect, when we could expect some next movement?
Well, they've got a very, very short timeline. It may seem like a long time between now and December 31st, but in terms of the time that these four lead negotiators have to finish Farm Bill, it's really not that much. Like you mentioned, the members of the House just exited the doors about an hour ago, and they won't be back until after the election, and some of them won't be back, may not be back at all. And so the House won't be here, so there will be no opportunity to vote on a farm bill until after the election. What has to happen now is the negotiators, and that's again the top four negotiators, that's the chairman and the ranking members of the House and Senate Agriculture Committees. They've been doing all this negotiating themselves. They've got to make some very rapid progress on a whole range of issues very soon if they're going to get a bill agreed to and then into text and all scored by the Congressional Budget Office to make sure that it's properly funded.
So Phil, we talked timeline, but do we know, based on conversations with folks that are in the room for these discussions, do we know where the negotiators are at this point?
There are disagreements across the bill. They have not closed out a single one of the 12 titles. And then there are major disagreements in the commodity title. We've written about this dispute between Chairman Conaway, the House Agriculture Committee, and Senate Ag Chairman Pat Roberts over what happens to unplanted base acres. Some big pot of money that Chairman Conaway needs for the PLC program and farmers in the Southern Plains who've been hurt by drought. But there's the issue which talked a lot about with nutrition and SNAP and work rules, but there are disagreements over funding for a range of programs, including the energy title and in conservation. There's just a lot to be done, and just not a lot of progress in closing off these big issues, as well as some small ones.
So Farm Bill dialogue going to continue throughout the month of October and into November, potentially for a November or December vote, the negotiators said this week. And so we've talked about the Farm Bill. Another looming deadline on Sunday that will come and go with no action, because the Congress was able to address this issue, is the government fiscal year expiring on Sunday. The House was able to pass a continuing resolution this week. Phil, President Trump has pledged to sign this bill, so it's looking like a no government shutdown. But any policy implications or anything that we should be looking for within this CR?
Well, actually have managed to get bills enacted, spending bills enacted for a few departments: the Defense Department, the Army Corps of Engineers, Labor, Health and Human Services departments. However, the USDA, FDA, Interior, EPA, all of those departments are wrapped up in a bill that hasn't been finalized yet, and it doesn't look like it's going to be finalized until December. There are still some outstanding policy issues in there. Probably the biggest one has to do with regulation of lab-grown meat. The appropriators and the Republican appropriators want to make sure that USDA has a role in that process. They've been struggling to work out a deal with the White House and the FDA on how that language is going to come out. That's the major thing, the major item that's outstanding, but it looks like it's going to be December before we actually get that, and USDA and FDA and EPA and Interior get their funding. If they can do that in the lame duck.
Right.
Again.
So
up in the air.
Yeah. Lame duck session going to involve both continuing resolution, government funding discussion, as well as a farm bill at this point. Presumably.
Maybe a farm bill.
Yeah. Presumably they're going to address a farm bill either through permanent legislation or through an extension.
Yes,
something needs to happen before the end of the year.
Right. They have to do an extension into 2019 if they don't get a farm bill done.
So we've talked about funding, we've talked about Farm Bill. Another thing to briefly discuss before we let you go, on the trade front, some discussions this week in New York, where the UN was meeting, some high-level officials from all over the world there. And one of the things that was discussed among the United States and Canada was their lack of an agreement at this point. Obviously, if you've been following the news, you know that the United States and Mexico have come to a bit of a trade agreement, and right now we are awaiting the administration sending that agreement between the United States and Mexico to Congress. It does not look like at this point that agreement will include Canada. Obviously, there potential for that to come along down the road, but some legitimate questions about whether or not turning a trilateral negotiation into a bilateral agreement is compliant with Trade Promotion Authority, which Congress gives the administration to negotiate these deals and send to Congress for an up or down vote. So still a number of things to come on that front, but want to just briefly give you an update on that, because we know how important trade is in the foreign policy discussion.
And Spencer, there's a lot of pressure from Congress. Trade Ambassador Lighthizer heard it yesterday in a couple of meetings on the Hill here. That Canada needs to be included. It looks like maybe November is the new deadline for getting something addressed with Canada, but Ambassador Lighthizer also told them that he doesn't think Canada's negotiating in good faith yet, and they don't have a deal. One other thing we should mention, though, a lot of interest to a number of our viewers, and that was, of course, that President Trump apparently has reached a deal to start negotiations, or a plan to start negotiations with Japan. So we'll see where that goes. Would be a huge victory for many in ag to open up Japan further.
So definitely some news on the trade front, as well as some developments in the funding and farm bill conversations this week. Bit of a busy week here in Washington as foreign policy goes, but we certainly appreciate you stopping by Agri-Pulse.com for all of your updates on farm and food policy and trade information as well. But I think that's going to do it for this week. So for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.